A Fox Report news alert. You are looking live at Baghdad, Iraq, where a massive explosion has reportedly rocked an area very close to the Iraqi Information Ministry yet again. And right after that big blast, this scene, a huge fire raging behind a shopping center close to that ministry building. All this happening within the last hour in the center of the capital. Breaking news in Operation Iraqi Freedom. So get ready for the Fox Report.
Tonight,
the coalition continuing the push to Baghdad on the ground and in the air.
What you're seeing at the moment is shaping of the battlefield and battle space so that when we engage the enemy, we engage them on our own terms and not on the terms of the enemy.
2 big chemical finds, an Iraqi training center for nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare, and a poisonous link pointing to al-Qaeda.
Coalition forces have attacked and destroyed a massive terrorist facility in the last 48 hours in northern Iraq.
Commandos capture a big fish, but can they flip him in time to help? Progress in the north, another shift in the front line yields control of more key territory. 2 attacks on our soldiers in 2 days. Now, new orders to shoot on sight. A homicide bomber targets a mall while the group behind him sends waves of so-called martyrs-to-be to Baghdad. The news, as Fox reports, right now.
live from the world headquarters of Fox News in New York, this is the Sunday edition of the Fox Report. Fair news, balanced news, now.
Terror tactics and a massive military buildup as Fox reports tonight. Hello, everybody. I'm Lori Dew. U.S. troops in the Gulf enduring a second straight day of terror attacks, this one on a base just north of Kuwait City. A pickup truck plowing into a group of soldiers, injuring at least 6. The attack coming one day after 4 U.S. soldiers were killed near the Iraqi city of Najaf when a man in a taxi blew himself up as the soldiers approached. These attacks forcing coalition troops to clamp down on civilian movements, and for the commander of the 3rd Infantry, there is no other choice.
As we move through here, we'll just shut the roads down. That's unfortunate, but it's going to be necessary to ensure the safety of our soldiers.
That troop safety paramount as coalition forces move reinforcements, both man and machine, into position. Live Team Fox coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom tonight. Kelly Wright at the Pentagon, James Rosen at the White House, Chris Klein in northern Iraq. But first, a Fox report now from Adam Housley, live in Kuwait City. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Lori. Underhanded terrorist tactics continue to plague our troops, this time while standing in line at a military base store out in the Kuwaiti desert just a few miles north of Kuwait City. The exclusive pictures obtained by Fox News show the scene. 15 soldiers run down by the driver of this white pickup truck. The man, said to be Egyptian, plowed into the group of soldiers, injuring 6. Only one, though, said to still be in the hospital. The truck driver was shot numerous times and is in critical condition, but still well enough to be questioned, according to coalition spokesman. This is not the first time coalition forces have been targeted in recent days by terrorist-type attacks. 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in a car bombing at a checkpoint near Najaf, a taxi driver blowing himself up after waving the soldiers over to his vehicle. At a military briefing in Doha, Qatar, General Tommy Franks, the man who is running the war, says the terror tactics are more of the same from the men of Saddam Hussein.
Not at all remarkable, I think, that a dying regime would undertake such tactics as suicide bombers. Remarkable, though, is the connection all the way to the top of the Iraqi regime.
Reports of troops going without are said to be overblown. Massive supply convoys continue to truck into Iraq. Extra soldiers said to be on board to provide cover as they make their way through opposition areas. The supply lines, some of the longest in military history, as coalition forces move within 50 miles or so of Baghdad. And sticking with the reinforcement theme, 2,300 new Marines are now on the ground here in Kuwait and preparing to head into Iraq. They are the first of numerous new call-ups to come here and help fight the war to liberate Iraq. Lori?
Adam Housley in Kuwait City. Thanks, Adam. British Royal Marines searching southern Iraq this weekend. The target, mobile Iraqi missile launchers. The team's hoping to find the launcher that fired a missile on Kuwait City Friday. The Marines used helicopters to scan the landscape and hovercrafts near the southern city of Qasir. A Marine UH-1 Huey helicopter crashing at a forward supply and refueling point in southern Iraq today. 3 U.S. Marines killed and 1 injured. The Pentagon says the crash looks like an accident. A Fox report now from Oliver North, embedded with that very group of soldiers, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit inside Iraq.
With the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force in Iraq, some sad news this evening. A Marine UH-1 helicopter carrying troops forward has crashed at a forward arming and refueling point inside Iraq. The aircraft, a UH-1 helicopter armed with 2.75-inch rocket pods and Gal 50 caliber machine guns, crashed, killing 3 and injuring 1. The injured Marine taken to a major medical center and, if necessary, for further treatment, on to the Naval Hospital ship Comfort, or all the way back to Ramstein, Germany, as is now being done routinely in this now 11-day-long contest. From Iraq with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, Lori, back to you.
Oliver North, thank you. Thousands of Marines in southern Iraq on seek and destroy missions, trying to put a stop to ambushes by Iraqi troops on the road to Baghdad. This as the 101st Airborne secures an airfield outside Najaf. A military spokesman saying the division is poised to take that city. Coalition troops keeping the pressure on Iraqi resistance around the southern city of Basra, engaging the enemy during the night. That's machine gun fire aimed at an Iraqi position outside the city. Meanwhile, closer to Basra, the flow of Iraqis back into the city, very hard to control. British troops giving up on efforts to control the crowds trying to get back in. An angry mob of 2,000 pushing past the checkpoint. The troops had been letting women and children through, but stopping adult men or anyone trying to get in or out with any weapons. Veteran journalist Peter Arnett appearing today on Iraqi state television and praising Saddam Hussein's government for the way in which it has treated journalists. Now, keep in mind, this is the very same network that just last week paraded U.S. POWs across its screens in direct violation of the Geneva Convention.
The 12 years I've been coming here, I've met unfailing courtesy and cooperation, courtesy from your people and cooperation from the Ministry of Information, which has allowed me and many other reporters to cover 12 whole years since the Gulf War with a degree of freedom which we appreciate. And that is continuing today.
Arnett, who has been covering the war for NBC News through a deal with National Geographic Explorer, went on to tell the interviewer the coalition war plan has failed and that President Bush and his advisors have gone back to the drawing board.
Clearly, the American war planners misjudged the determination of the Iraqi forces. And I personally do not understand how that happened, because I've been here many times, and in my commentaries on television, I would tell the Americans about the determination of the Iraqi forces, the determination of the government, and the willingness to fight for their country. But me and others who felt the same way were not listened to by the Bush administration.
NBC released this statement saying, quote, Peter Arnett and his crew have risked their lives to bring the American people up-to-date, straightforward information on what is happening in and around Baghdad. NBC went on to say the impromptu interview with Iraqi TV was done as a professional courtesy. His remarks were analytical in nature and were not intended to be anything more. All this as Al Jazeera broadcast pictures today of captured Italian journalists in Basra. According to the Arab-owned network, the men were detained after illegally entering Iraq from Kuwait. Several Western media outlets have been booted altogether from Iraq in recent months, and 2 Newsday reporters are still missing after being kicked out of Baghdad. The paper saying it believes the journalists are being held by the Iraqi government. Coalition forces in Basra finding an Iraqi training center for nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare. The center, filled with crates of nuclear, biological, and chemical suits, also discovered were antidotes for any exposure to an attack.
We have a live and a training combo pen, similar to the ones that the British Army are issued with, and they have to use in case of a nerve agent attack. And there's also some ampules of atropine and some various other bits and bobs containing some liquids which we're not sure what they are.
Chemical experts saying some of the vials discovered may contain mild nerve agents that are used for training purposes. The Secretary of Defense acknowledging today the most difficult days in war lie ahead. But Donald Rumsfeld also assuring the war plan is solid, the troops are well prepared, and the Iraqi command and control is in shambles.
They've seen one of the most powerful coalition forces within 49 miles of Baghdad, their capital. They've seen their port taken. They've seen their oil wells in the south secured. They have seen a bombing campaign against their command and control, degrading their command and control. They have seen an attack on their leadership, and we have not seen their leadership since. Where is Saddam Hussein? Where is Qusay? Where is Uday, his sons? They're not talking.
Indeed. Rumsfeld saying in just over a week, coalition troops have moved within 50 miles of Baghdad, have secured the airfields in the north, south, and western parts of Iraq, and the only way this war will end is with the liberation of the Iraqi people. Live Team Fox coverage on Operation Iraqi Freedom continues now, and a Fox report from Kelly Wright, live at the Pentagon. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Lori. There is a lot of forward momentum for the Allied forces, but as they make that forceful advance towards Baghdad, in the rear, military leaders say they're having to stand guard against acts of terror. In the meantime, a heavy rotation of bombing continues over Baghdad. They're concentrating on the relentless bombing campaign on Baghdad, and the Iraqi Republican Guard divisions dug in outside the city, also operating within the capital. Tonight, they made an airstrike targeting the Ministry of Information. The aim of these airstrikes is to degrade the battle strength of the Medina, Nebuchadnezzar, and Hammurabi divisions of the Republican Guard prior to any ground contact with Allied troops. They are also targeting Fedayeen camps and other terrorist groups. Now, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said today as troops move closer to Baghdad, there may be more terror and more intense fighting.
There'll be dangerous days ahead. Baghdad is not going to be easy, but the outcome is certain. And at some point, the Iraqi people will end up fearing Saddam Hussein and his regime less, and they will end up anticipating liberation and freedom more, and it will end, and it will end successfully.
And we take you to Baghdad live now. We were looking at the live pictures. General Tommy Franks said today he does not think it all remarkable that a, quote, a dying regime would undertake in some tactics as suicide bombings. He went on to say the attacks were clearly supported by those in power in Baghdad. Now, as to the end of this war, General Tommy Franks says no one can ever choose how long a war will take, but he does say that the Allied forces are showing remarkable progress. He is pleased with that, and he maintains that this campaign is on track. Lori?
Kelly Wright at the Pentagon. Thanks, Kelly. As coalition aircraft bombed Baghdad from above, massive damage seen across the capital. But Saddam's troops digging in behind sandbags, aiming rifles and grenade launchers into the sky. All this as Iraq vows to step up homicide attacks, claiming 4,000 Arabs have come to the city and are ready to be martyrs for their cause. Well, coalition forces are in a bitter firefight with Iraqis outside of Basra. Enemy troops hammering away at Royal Marines with artillery and rocket-propelled grenades. But the assault quickly turned back as the Marines destroyed at least 2 Iraqi bunkers in 1 hour and ended the fight without a single casualty. Other coalition troops taking aim at another of Saddam's weapons in central Iraq, a British Challenger tank taking out a TV antenna at a communications complex. He's considered Saddam's closest bodyguard, never leaving his boss's side. But at a press conference last week, a rare sight, the bodyguard was on his own. Tonight, how that sighting is raising new questions about Saddam's whereabouts and condition. Coalition troops hammering away at Iraqi positions in the north, 2 major cities targeted, and the air campaign getting some help from the ground. They are trained to take out a target from more than 2 miles away, to stay in the hills, protect our troops from enemy forces inside the United States Air Force Counter Sniper School. As Fox reports tonight, for the news capital of the world, live to homes around the globe, this is your news, fair and balanced. This is the Fox Report on Fox News Channel.
The captioning for this program is brought to you by
Allied jets converging on Iraqi positions today near the town of Kalak, which marks the divide between Kurdish and Iraqi-held territory. And the pressure on the ground is intensifying. More U.S. paratroopers arriving in the north, joining up with Kurdish troops. The militia there is clearing landmines left behind by the Iraqis. And in Mosul, more bombers overhead. Team Fox coverage continues now in a Fox report from Chris Klein in northern Iraq.
Thanks, Lori. Lori, we're standing on a mountaintop position just under about a mile high here at a Kurdish forces guerrilla camp. Behind me, you may see the lights of Mosul, some 30 miles south-southwest. Now, during the course of the day, still in daylight hours, we clearly witnessed some Allied air activity overhead. We also heard a great number of Allied transports, we presume heading in the other direction to land more reinforcements for the advance elements of the airborne forces that have arrived in northern Iraq. We also clearly saw the vapor trail of a B-52 bomber, but we didn't really hear intensive aerial bombardment during the course of the day. However, that has changed. In the course of simply the last 10 minutes or so, we saw some rather large bomb flashes in Mosul and clearly heard a number of Allied aircraft overhead, so that effort to pound Mosul seems to remain unchanged. However, we spoke today to a rather remarkable source, a Kurdish man who had managed to escape Mosul via a secret route and entered liberated territory only in the last 24 hours. He asked to remain anonymous, fearing reprisals against his family, which still remains in Mosul, keeping in mind that the great majority of the population in Mosul is predominantly Kurdish. In any case, several fascinating allegations. One being that Allied air power, in fact, 3 unspecified missiles had indeed hit the secret police headquarters in Mosul, which the Iraqi authorities have refused to admit, according to this secret source, and revealed to the public and to Iraqi television that only civilian casualties were incurred in that attack. Also, our source told us that the bulk of conventional forces, that is regular army units as well as Republican Guard and Special Republican Guard units and their heavy weaponry, had left Mosul very secretly, very quietly, discreetly over the course of the last 3 weeks, and the defense of the city now remained virtually solely in the hands of the Fedayeen Saddam and Ba'ath Party militia, the irregular guerrilla groups and terror groups that have caused such difficulties for the Allied advance further south, attacking flanks and rear areas and supply columns, fighting very tenaciously, though very lightly armed. It may be a similar scenario if and when Allied forces and Kurdish forces decide to strike against Mosul on the ground. Back to you, Lori.
Chris Klein in northern Iraq. Thank you. Tanks firing, soldiers scrambling, enemy troops surrendering. Americans watching real battles unfold before their very eyes. And it's not easy to be a spectator when your loved one is a player. Royal Air Force crews working round the clock, pilots turning aircrafts around in just minutes. We scope out the scene in the sky. No peace for the peacekeepers, their compound under attack, and guess what building was just across the street?
Crisis with Iraq. Our team Washington has updates and in-depth reports from the White House, the Pentagon, and our nation's capital. Stay with the Fox News Channel. Real journalism, fair and balanced.
Fox News.
President Bush is back at the White House after a weekend at Camp David. He's getting ready to ask Congress for more money to fight the war abroad and protect Americans here at home. A Fox report now from White House correspondent James Rosen, who is live inside the White House tonight rather than the North Lawn. Hi, James.
Hi, we're inside tonight, Lori, for the same reason that the president was forced to abandon his helicopter, Marine One, today in coming back from Camp David. Instead, he and the First Lady and a select number of aides all had to get into a sport utility vehicle and then engage in a 90-minute motorcade home. The president's Sunday morning spent at church services and also in a CIA briefing. Tomorrow, President Bush joins Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge for a speech at the Port of Philadelphia's Coast Guard facility. The president will urge Congress to approve quickly his request for an additional $75 billion billion to fight the war and shore up domestic defenses. Of that money, $4 billion plus is earmarked for Homeland Security. The largest chunk of that is set aside for the Coast Guard. States and localities would get around $2 billion, and the FBI would see about $500 million. Meantime, new polls show Americans think more highly of President Bush since the onset of the war in Iraq. A new Newsweek poll released today shows Mr. Bush's overall approval rating at 68%. That's up 15 percentage points from 2 weeks ago. When the issue is limited to Iraq, the Newsweek poll shows 70% approve of the president's performance. However, when the subject is the economy, his approval rating falls to 53%. Likewise, the most recent Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll shows 66% of Americans now approve of President Bush's overall performance, 24% disapprove. That's roughly identical to Newsweek's finding. When the subject is limited to Iraq, Opinion Dynamics finds the president's approval rating rising by a few percentage points, just as Newsweek did. Yet when asked how well the war is going for the United States, despite their heavy support for the president's handling of it, only 37% said very well, 46% replied somewhat well, and overall 11% said not very well or not well at all. Reporting live from the White House, James Rosen, Fox News. Lori?
All right, James, thanks a lot. International peacekeepers are under attack in Kabul, Afghanistan. A rocket slamming into the headquarters today, and that building is right across the street from the U.S. Embassy. A second rocket landed on the eastern edge of town. Police think they both were launched from the same location. No one was hurt in either incident. He unleashed a deadly grenade attack on his own comrades, and now Sergeant Hassan Akbar of the 101st Airborne Division is back in the United States to face the consequences. A military judge finding probable cause the soldier committed the attack in Kuwait that killed 2 people and wounded 15 more. An Army spokesman says the motive in the attack was most likely resentment. At this point, no formal charges have been filed. You are looking live at Baghdad. At 24 minutes past 3 a.m. on Sunday, our coverage of the war continues after a quick check of big news off the battlefield. While his fellow citizens in Iraq are literally starving, it seems that Saddam Hussein's main mouthpiece is living it up here in New York. According to the New York Post, Iraqi UN Ambassador Mohammed al-Duri was spotted in a trendy Upper East Side restaurant, stuffing his face with grilled swordfish, creme brulee, and champagne even. Al-Duri running up a $200 tab, even leaving a $30 tip. The restaurant's owner says he wishes President Bush had come instead. As our troops march toward Baghdad, everyone wonders, where is Saddam Hussein? Well, tonight, we connect the clues. How do you spot a sniper when you're smack in the middle of enemy territory? And the bad guys could be just about anywhere. The U.S. Army knows. The military gets extra help searching the waters off Iraq, and there's nothing man-made that can beat their natural talents. 2 minutes to top stories as Fox reports tonight. But first, troops on the battlefield operate under the constant threat of sniper attacks. Lone gunmen perched in the hills looking to take out anyone with a coalition uniform. But the U.S. military answering that threat with some firepower of its own. And a Fox report now from Jonathan Sari.
As coalition forces forge ahead in Operation Iraqi Freedom overseas, the U.S. Air Force is in Arkansas, training airmen for a mission to hunt enemy snipers.
Enemy fire that is harassing fire from sniper demoralizes the troops on an air base because they never know when they're going to be shot at. So for us to have an ability to counter a sniper attack on an air base is absolutely critical to our operations.
The nation's only close precision engagement course is located at Camp Robinson. It's a joint venture between the Air Force and the Arkansas National Guard. The Air Force is building a team of sharpshooters to defend air bases, nuclear sites, and overseas operations.
Sharpshooter ready.
Hold same. Send it.
Students learn how to use a satellite-based global positioning system, a laser rangefinder, and other high-powered equipment to identify individuals as far as 4,000 yards away. That's more than 2 miles.
What this course will do for them is allow them to reach out and touch the enemy at further distances than normally they could without large collateral damage.
About 60% of students graduate and become Air Force sharpshooters. Airmen train every day for 2 weeks, working 15 to 18 hours a day. Their mission is not only to take out enemy snipers, but to gather intelligence on enemy positions, all while being hunted by the instructors.
It's imperative that we be camouflaged, that we're not even seen. People can walk right by us and not realize we're in there.
Graduates of the sharpshooter school return to their home base, ready to protect military sites and operations in America and around the world. Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
We are Fox News Channel. This is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. Time now for the top of the news. A huge fire burning in the Iraqi capital, the flames shooting high after new explosions rocked Baghdad. Unclear whether there are coalition airstrikes going on, but the fire reportedly is right next to Iraq's information ministry. We have a live report coming up. Coalition forces in Basra coming across what just might be a training center for nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. They say the place was filled with crates of protective suits and also antidotes for any exposure to an attack. The guy who built a bunker for Saddam Hussein telling what the place is really like, the underground fortress below the dictator's presidential palace, is about 20 years old, but supposedly still able to withstand a modern-day nuclear bomb blast. The German engineer who built it said he doubts even coalition bunker bombs can break through it. But the bigger question for military commanders, where is Saddam? A Fox report now from Mike Tobin at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha, Qatar.
Senior CENTCOM officials say General Franks was briefed today that the senior leadership in Iraq has lost its morale, lost its organization. This amid rumors that Saddam Hussein and his family were working on a deal for exile into Syria. General Franks touched on that in his briefing.
I don't know whether the leader of this regime is dead or alive. I don't know. Perhaps someone knows, but I don't know. I will say this. I have not seen credible evidence over the last period of days since we started this operation that this regime is being controlled from the top, as we understand the top.
General Franks and his battle plan coming into the sights of the critics who suggest he didn't get all the troops he wanted for the prosecution of the war. General Franks denied that. He denied reports that the battle has been paused in any way, shape, or form. And he says despite remarkable progress, this war will take as long as necessary.
One never knows how long a war will take. We don't know. But what we do know is that this coalition sees this regime gone at the end of that war. Also sees the Iraqi people having a chance at freedom, which they don't have right now.
And an Iraqi general captured by British forces is yielding good information for the coalition. They say this general has led them to a weapons cache. Since that time, coalition forces have destroyed 26 surface-to-air missile systems and 6 anti-aircraft guns. That's the latest from CENTCOM. Mike Tobin, Fox News.
All right, Mike, thank you. Well, everyone has an opinion about where Saddam Hussein might be and whether he's dead or alive. The military, of course, looking at the cold, hard facts, trying to determine if the Iraqi dictator is in hiding or out of commission. A Fox report now from Julie Kurtz live in Washington. Julie.
Hi, Lori. The Secretary of Defense confirms to Fox News that a recent piece of video from Iraq has caught his attention because of what it may say about the fate of Saddam Hussein. This one doesn't even have Saddam in it. It's of Thursday's press briefing with the Iraqi defense minister. It's interesting because the man standing against the wall there has never been seen outside the presence of Saddam Hussein. According to our intelligence sources, he is Saddam Hussein's personal bodyguard. Intelligence analysts were stunned when they first saw the tape. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld tells Fox it may indicate Saddam is not moving around much anymore, that he's injured or even dead.
Could be either one. We just don't know. We do have reason to believe that the attack a day or two before the air war began on a regime leadership compound had senior leaders there. We know that, and we know we hit it. But we do not know, because we're not on the ground, precisely who was there and what the effect had been. All we know is that since then we have not seen Saddam Hussein or his sons live anywhere or heard any reports live.
Rumsfeld also said he does not think the videos of Saddam Hussein after the bombing of his compound look legitimate to him. He says the Iraqi government prepared a lot of tapes before the war started. Now, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff also spoke today about Saddam's fate.
It's curious that with enemy troops 50 miles south of the capital city, with air supremacy over most of the country, with coalition forces using several airfields in the country, that the leader has not come out and been seen on live television.
Iraq's ambassador to the UN today tried to laugh off the question of whether his leader is dead or alive, but he offered no new evidence about his leader's fate. Ambassador Mohammed Al-Douri said, quote, "I am here. I am in New York. I think that he's alive, of course, because we've seen him several times on television." Apparently, he has had no contact or firsthand knowledge about Saddam's condition beyond what we all see on television. Back to you, Lori.
Julie Kurtz in Washington, thanks. More explosions rocking Baghdad within the last hour, sparking a huge fire in the capital city, reportedly right behind the Ministry of Information. Live Team Fox coverage continues in a Fox report now from Simon Marks in Amman, Jordan. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Laurie. Some quite extraordinary scenes in Baghdad tonight. We're going to take you, first of all, live to the city now. The fires that we were seeing a little bit earlier appear to have rather died down. We saw earlier in the evening some amazing pictures that we'll bring you in just a second. But as you can see in these live images that we're bringing you from the Iraqi capital, for the moment, things seem relatively calm on the streets and quiet in that picture. Let's go earlier. Excuse me, to the videotape that we brought you live a little bit earlier on tonight. The Ministry of Information building and buildings around it were burned. It's hard to tell from these pictures whether the main fire was at the Ministry of Information building or in the surrounding apartment buildings that you can see there at the rear of the picture. Many of those buildings are believed to be home to members of the Republican Guards and other members of the Iraqi elite. It's not clear whether these fires were caused by U.S. aerial bombardment. We're not certain yet precisely what the cause was or whether any casualties were incurred, but there's no question this is all part of an ongoing strategy to try and degrade Saddam Hussein's communications infrastructure. The Ministry of Information, of course, has been targeted by the United States in the past. So too have the offices of Iraqi television, which lie not far from those Ministry of Information buildings. We've been monitoring the output of Iraqi television here over the last hour or so. It is getting very sporadic. The signal appears to be weakening considerably. Now let's take you to the south, to Basra, and to a correction of a story that we reported a little bit earlier in the evening. We told you that after clashes with Marines that left civilians scrambling for cover, the Brits had captured an Iraqi general. Late tonight, the Ministry of Defence in London said that in fact they had no Iraqi general in custody, but it's believed that they were led to an arms cache, as we reported, by another prisoner of war whose rank at this hour is unknown. That British operation in Basra, by the way, is being called by the Brits Operation James, as in Bond. James Bond. Reporting live from Amman, Jordan, Simon Marks. Laurie, back to you.
All right, Simon, thanks a lot. Just days after resigning from his post as a top Pentagon advisor, Richard Perle is making bold predictions about this war. He says the conflict will probably be over faster than the last Gulf War, largely because the ground fighting started so quickly. The 1991 conflict lasted 6 weeks, you may recall. Perle's comments coming at a very interesting time. In the past week, both President Bush and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld have repeatedly warned that the war, which is now in its 11th day, could be long and difficult. Soldiers in the Army's 3rd Infantry taking extra measures to protect themselves while on the move to Baghdad. The 3rd ID commander deciding to close off roads in the combat zone to civilians. It's a move meant to prevent another homicide bombing like the one that claimed 4 of his soldiers. This sign reads, "Stop here. Do not go any further or we will shoot." But still, the 2nd Brigade had contact with the enemy again today. A Fox report now from Greg Kelly, embedded with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division. Greg?
Lori, no sign of a combat slowdown here whatsoever. The 2nd Brigade combat team out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, had a full day of movement. We are now deeper inside Iraq than at any time before. They also had a full day of contact with the enemy. Those Al-Quds and Fedayeen, as well as Iraqi soldiers attacking from trenches dug in the desert with their weapons of choice, rocket-propelled grenades and AK-47s. The 2nd Brigade responded with tank fire as well as artillery and calling in close air support from the Air Force and the Navy. At the end of the day, the numbers worked out like this: 30 Iraqi killed in action, as well as 50 enemy prisoners of war in custody. No casualties on the American side. Still, with all this fighting, there's a sense here that the real battle, the one they came here for, has yet to come. Lori?
Greg Kelly, thanks a lot. Well, it's hard to get inside the heads of Saddam Hussein and his men, but according to Time magazine, the U.S. thinks the Iraqi command distributed copies of the movie Black Hawk Down, using it as a sort of manual for defeating Americans. The film tells the story of 18 U.S. Army Rangers that were killed by Somali mobs in Mogadishu in 1993. The Rangers had been trying to rescue some of our guys after 2 choppers went down. More evidence: the site where the bodies of 4 American soldiers were found near Nasiriyah may have been a torture chamber of sorts. The New York Post reports at least one of the bodies had been brutalized and mutilated. The military still won't confirm whether the dead soldiers are members of the Army's 507th Maintenance Unit, which was ambushed 1 week ago. Of the 12 missing members, 5 are the prisoners of war which were paraded on Iraqi TV. 2 others are known to be dead. Marines on the front getting some time to regroup and sleep. And the break is a welcome one. And a Fox report now from Rick Leventhal, embedded with the 1st Marine Unit, 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion.
It's Sunday morning, March 30th. They are firing huge howitzer cannons behind us. They are the most deafening noise we've heard since we've been here in Iraq. They are firing 155 millimeter howitzer shells that can travel more than 18 miles. Some of the shells are filled with small grenade-like bombs that can actually clear up to 200 meters around as they explode when they hit the ground. There's not a lot of fighting going on in our vicinity, but there are a lot of howitzers being fired.
So what are we looking at?
The M1908 howitzer.
It's a big gun.
It sure is.
What does it do?
It destroys the enemy.
Units with the 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion are also running security sweeps on a daily basis, checking nearby fields and campsites for signs of enemy Iraqis. But the past couple of days have been mostly quiet, a chance to clean weapons and gear, catch up on sleep, or air out some tired feet, make some coffee, and pick out a tasty meal.
Had a chicken with salsa, pasta with vegetables.
It's also a time to catch up on hygiene, and we're all grateful my photographer Christian Galdabini took advantage of the opportunity.
Even after doing this hygiene, I would be so dirty that if I were to show up back home in the condition I am in after a hygiene, people would tell me to get out.
Call it an operational pause or a tactical delay, but don't expect it to last much longer. In Iraq, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
Coalition forces mounting one of their fiercest air assaults yet on Baghdad, sending fireballs and mushroom clouds over the sky. Royal Air Force crews based in Kuwait also providing 24-hour backup to Allied troops. These British jets alone averaging 50 missions a day. And the bombing runs continue from the Mediterranean Sea. A Fox report now from Fox producer Jamie Nelson aboard the USS Truman.
The primary mission right now for aircraft from the Harry S. Truman is close air support for the Special Operations Forces on the ground in northern Iraq. Now, those strike missions have taken them as far south as Baghdad 2 times, but they remain focused on the areas around Kirkuk and Mosul, where Republican Guard and Iraqi military forces have been collecting. Now, this morning, 3 strike packages from Carrier Air Wing 3 embarked aboard the Harry S. Truman took to the skies over Iraq, and there we're told they have been very busy coordinating attacks with forward air controllers against targets like military vehicles, bunkers, caves, troops out in the open, and terrorist camps and sites. Now, we're told that those strikes from the Mediterranean in the north have so far been out in the open and away from civilian areas, and collateral damage has thus far not been an issue. Now, that may change as the fight moves closer to and into cities, where commanders say the Iraqi military is moving potential targets like radar facilities, missile launchers, trucks, and weapon systems. That may change as the fight moves closer to and into cities, where commanders say the Iraqi military is moving potential targets like radar domes, missile launchers, trucks, and other weapons next to civilian areas such as mosques, schools, and hospitals. The hold on Tomahawk missile launches from the Mediterranean remains in effect for now. Turkey, which had allowed overflight of those weapons, is asking for an explanation as to why 3 of those cruise missiles crashed to the ground there. U.S. Air Force weapons experts are examining the wreckage for any clues. Spokesmen at CENTCOM say this will have no impact on Operation Iraqi Freedom, and in response to Turkey's decision, the Navy has moved some, but not all, of its surface ships capable of firing Tomahawk missiles out of the Mediterranean. Aboard the Harry S. Truman in the Mediterranean Sea, Jamie Nelson, Fox News.
More American B-52 bombers are Gulf-bound. The planes ready for action, carrying massive bombs and cruise missiles. This as fighter jets like F-A-18s and F-14s continue taking off from aircraft carriers in the Gulf. Coalition forces moving into Iraq from all sides. Down south, the British Army literally bridging the gap, creating a unique route into Saddam country. A Fox report now from David Bowden of our sister network Sky News.
An M3 amphibious vehicle plunges into the Shatt al-Basra waterway in southern Iraq. Just hours earlier, these same craft had ferried the 14 British Challenger 2 tanks across the Shatt al-Basra and into battle with Iraqi troops on the outskirts of the country's second city. These Royal Engineers have not slept for more than 2 days as they use the M3s to carry ammunition and other supplies to the tanks and their crews from Sea Squadron, the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, on the front line. This is the first time these floating bridges have been used in combat, and without them, the British Army's biggest tank battle since World War II couldn't have happened as it did.
They drive here independently, commanded by one man and has 2 crew. They independently hit the water. Upon hitting the water, the pilot jumps out the back, who operates it and manoeuvres it on the water. They couple up together, ramp out, and then they're fit to go and take any sort of main battle tank.
How long did it take from you beginning your operation to the 14th tank leaving the other side?
Once we're actually on site to getting the tanks across, we were coupled together, ready to go in 25 minutes. Once the tanks were here, we operated a cycle, and again, within 4 hours, we had them all on the other side.
The M3 crews went into action so quickly, they didn't even have time to check the depth of the water. The Challenger tanks were loaded in 2s. That's 150 tons of armor on each of these floating bridges. The journey across took barely 2 minutes, then the tanks were on their way to Basra and engaging the Iraqi troops. With the floating bridges now linking the Al-Faw Peninsula with the mainland of southern Iraq, fighting the battle in and around Basra should be made that much more effective. David Bowden, Sky News, on the Shatt al-Basra.
The military says coalition forces control more than 1/3 of Iraq's territory and 95% of its skies. But to topple Saddam Hussein, the coalition must take the Iraqi capital. We are charting the progress on the road to Baghdad, and a Fox report now from Rebecca Gomez live in our New York newsroom. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Lori. The Pentagon warning the American public today our troops have yet to encounter their toughest battle, the battle for Baghdad, though military officials have no doubt about the outcome. Allied troops coming strong from the north and the south, all directions heading toward Baghdad. The 101st Airborne Division encircling the southern city of Najaf, about 100 miles south of Baghdad, blocking roads into towns and preparing to go door to door to root out paramilitary supporters of Saddam Hussein. The Marines continuing northward in seek and destroy missions in which our troops seek out Fedayeen fighters and other Iraqi thugs and defeat them. Coalition forces trying to put down all these pockets of resistance and move on with the main mission of overthrowing Saddam Hussein's regime. U.S.-led coalition forces opening up an all-important northern front using B-52 bombers to pound the enemy. Army brigades in the north moved 10 miles closer to Baghdad with little resistance. Earlier, U.S. fighter pilots dropping bombs, softening up the Iraqi defense lines around the capital. Fires erupting throughout Baghdad, the air campaign paving the way for coalition forces. Now, this new map shows you the various Iraqi Republican Guard divisions around the city lying in wait for Allied troops. This is what the Pentagon is talking about when it says the fiercest fighting awaits. There are nearly 300,000 coalition forces deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom, with more regiments on the way, including 2,300 Marines with the 24th Expeditionary Unit. That's the latest now, Lori, on our troops in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm Rebecca Gomez in Fox Central.
Rebecca, thank you. Watching the front lines from the home front, a pretty nerve-wracking thing for families with a loved one on the battlefield. But for some, watching the war play out is a blessing in disguise. And a Fox report now from Trace Gallagher.
It comes to you now from the middle of a sandstorm.
Americans watching the war live, given an historic front row seat 24 hours a day. For the family of Marine Corporal Ryan Bertrand of the 1st Expeditionary Division, being able to monitor the war in real time is a blessing.
Gives me a way to feel connected a little bit to what's going on over there.
For Linda and Greg Cruson, keeping an eye out for their son Jared has also become a full-time task. They too welcome it.
I've always been a real hands-on mom, and I've always been where my kids are, so for me it's very helpful.
Though one family's blessing is another's curse. A California mother saw her son dead on television before she was notified by the military.
I am sure it's him.
And a Texas family watched as their loved one was paraded as a POW.
From what we have seen, she is shaken, as any soldier in her situation would be, but unharmed.
Even those comforted by the coverage say there is an anxiety in the very prospect of seeing your son or daughter turn up wounded or worse.
I don't know how I'll react. You know, I've never been through this before.
You're with them like every step of the way, and every time you see that ticker and see that somebody's moving or someone's been captured or wounded or killed, it's horrible.
Yet they are riveted to the voices, the images, and the ticker because they have a vested interest in the outcome, which they believe will come soon.
You really just want to see, the last thing, or, with the pictures above it says, the war is over and they're coming home.
In Los Angeles, Trace Gallagher, Fox News.
They have sonar skills like no other animal on the planet, and that is exactly why they're a crucial part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Tonight, right along on their underwater assignment. He wanted to send a message about the war in Iraq, so he headed to a crowded cafe with a bomb. Just wait till you hear what the Islamic Jihad had to say about this martyr mission. It's the middle of the night, but Baghdad is all lit up. More explosions and a massive fire. A roundup of the latest war news as Fox reports tonight. Coalition forces are fighting Iraq on the ground, from the air and from the sea. By now, you've probably heard about the Dolphins on duty. More on their underwater assignment in a Fox report now from Orlando Salinas.
Marine mammals, as of Wednesday, now part of the coalition team, patrolling the waters in the port city of Qasr in southern Iraq, working to bring humanitarian aid to the Iraqi people.
We use their sonar is incredible. So we use their sonar to look for mines in the ocean, the bays, whatever. It happens to be the river. So we'll find the mines with them.
U.S. Navy-trained Dolphins on duty, able to dive as deep as 1,700 feet and race underwater at 22 miles an hour. Mammals with natural sonar trained to find killer mines. As many as 4 Atlantic bottlenose dolphins on loan from the Navy's San Diego facility, now searching Persian Gulf seabeds, identifying, then marking underwater mines for disposal. Dolphins whose built-in biological sonar, experts say, is far better than anything man-made. For days, U.S. and British divers have searched for mines in the North Arabian Sea, waters pitch black.
The diving conditions are appalling. There's tidal streams and visibility is pretty much nil, and the seabed is just thick mud, sort of 1 or 2 meters of mud, and they're having to crawl through that.
The military began using marine animals back in the 60s. Even sea lions and beluga whales have been trained to track suspicious swimmers and restrain them until humans can take over.
What we have learned through positive reinforcement is that most everything that we're able to ask them, they're able to do.
Some animal rights activists say dolphins shouldn't be on duty, but military planners say while these mammals do crackerjack work, they're also trained not to touch the mines. Orlando Salinas, Fox News.
You are looking live at Baghdad, Iraq, where it is just before 4 a.m. Monday morning. Our coverage of the war continues after a quick check of big news off the battlefield. A crowded cafe, the scene of the latest suicide bombing in Israel, and the militant group Islamic Jihad is calling the attack a gift to the people of Iraq. A Fox report now from Amy Kellogg in Netanya.
A suicide bomber exploded himself on a pedestrian mall in the coastal city of Netanya Sunday. He killed only himself, but the attack injured dozens of people, including 10 Israeli soldiers and a few babies. The attack could have been worse if the suicide bomber hadn't encountered an Israeli soldier as he headed toward the entrance of the cafe.
The bomber chose the height of the lunch hour to blow himself up. It happened just here outside a cafe where people were sitting, enjoying one of the first sunny days of the season.
The bomber, 19-year-old Rami Ranim, was from a village near Tulkarm in the West Bank, very close to Netanya. He was a member of Islamic Jihad, which called the attack a gift to the Iraqi people on Land Day, the day each year Israeli Arabs protest the confiscation of Arab land by Israel. Islamic Jihad also claimed it has bombers in Baghdad prepared to defend the city and its history. While groups like Islamic Jihad call such attacks resistance to Israeli occupation, the mayor of Netanya calls them something else.
The men who came here came with a full intention to kill. Nothing else by killing. This is a murder. Nothing. There is no other name for what he did here.
Though the Arab-Israeli conflict has been off TV screens since the war in Iraq began, today's bombing is proof the troubles here continue unabated. There are still Israeli military incursions into Palestinian territories, though they have been on a smaller scale. In the past 2 weeks, Palestinian sources say 12 Palestinian civilians have been killed, many of them children. A few hours after the bombing, life in Netanya was back to normal. Residents of this city, which has seen at least 7 suicide bombings, say attackers score no victories here.
This is a hard day, but we'll get over it, and tomorrow the Mizrachov, the mall here, will be crowded, and people will be having coffee, and people will be probably talking about what happened today, but we'll be out again because that's the way life is. That's the way you have to go on.
In Netanya, Amy Kellogg, Fox News.
Just before 8 p.m. in New York, coming up on 4 a.m. in Baghdad, a huge fire lighting up the Iraqi capital after new explosions rocked the city earlier tonight. The fire apparently right next to Iraq's information ministry. Coalition forces in Basra are discovering what just might be a training center for nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare, the place filled with protective suits and antidotes for exposure to an attack. 3 Marines dead, 1 injured after a chopper crash at a refueling spot deep inside Iraq. The Pentagon saying so far the crash appears to be an accident. And that is your news as Fox reports tonight. I'm Lori Dew. Shepard Smith is back in the chair tomorrow night. Fox News Weekend Prime Time, beginning with John Gibson, is coming up next. Have a nice evening.
The Fox Report, a presentation of Fox News Channel, the network America trusts for fair and balanced news.
Our troops on the front lines around Baghdad are getting ready for an all-out assault on Saddam's weakened Republican Guard forces, but the nation's top general says no one's rushing into anything. An immense blast followed by a huge fire in Baghdad tonight. The blast and blaze right next to Iraq's information ministry, where reporters in Baghdad are still stationed. And one of those reporters, NBC's Peter Arnett, is causing an uproar, telling Iraqi TV that the Bush administration ignored his warnings about Iraq's determination to fight And he said much, much more. Hi, everybody. I'm John Gibson, and welcome to our nonstop coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Let's go first to Amman, Jordan, where Simon Marks is standing by with the latest. Hi, Simon.
Hi, John. Major developments tonight in Baghdad. Let's take you live, first of all, to the Iraqi capital, just to take a live look at what's going on there now. And as you'll see in these live pictures, it is relatively quiet in Baghdad at the moment. But these pictures that you're seeing live are in stark contrast to the pictures that we brought you around an hour and a half ago. And if we can go to those tape pictures, you will see that the Ministry of Information building and buildings around it were apparently burning in quite a ferocious manner. It's hard to tell from these shots whether the main fire was at the Ministry of Information itself or in the surrounding apartment buildings. Those are the buildings you can see at the back of the shot there. Many of those are believed to be home to members of the Republican Guard and other members of the Iraqi elite. Unclear whether all this was caused by US-led airstrikes, but of course the Ministry of Information had come under attack before, and close by it are the buildings that house Iraqi television. We've been monitoring Iraqi television here in Amman over the last 90 minutes or so. No question at all that the signal is deteriorating and most of the time seems to be cutting out. Now, tragedy tonight to report for 3 US Marines in southern Iraq. A Huey helicopter went down in southern Iraq near a forward supply and refueling point. Colonel Oliver North, embedded with the US Marines for the Fox News channel, reported earlier tonight that 3 Marines aboard were killed and a 4th was injured. Up in the north, carpet bombing reported in the northern city of Mosul. At least 1 B-52, you saw it there, reportedly responsible for some of the heaviest bombing in the area around Mosul. Coalition forces seem to be targeting one particular town surrounded by forces loyal to Saddam Hussein. But the headline from here tonight, undoubtedly, those dramatic pictures that we showed you from Baghdad. It seems that the Ministry of Information again has either come under attack or some kind of fire has spontaneously broken out there. We don't know what caused it, but it certainly appeared to be a pretty vigorous fire that was underway in Baghdad. John?
You know, Simon, we're going to get to it later. We're going to be talking about Peter Arnett, who is working over there for National Geographic Explorer, and is appearing on NBC in this country. But he seems to have the run of Baghdad. What do you make of Peter Arnett's comments? Once again, we'll get into them in detail later, but these comments that seem to be supporting the Iraqi regime, seem to be encouraging Iraqi resistance. He declared the American war plan dead. He took credit for galvanizing opposition in the United States to the war with his reports on Iraqi civilian casualties. What do you make of what Peter Arnett is up to?
Well, John, I'm in a difficult position here because I have to say that Peter is actually a friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years, and when I was in Baghdad just 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was extremely helpful to me and to the team that I was there with. There's no question that this interview is, at the very least, a curiosity. It's very difficult to understand the circumstances under which it was recorded. Certainly, appearing on Iraqi television under these circumstances would be a curious choice, I think, for any journalist based in the city reporting for Western news outlets. But I think until we hear from Peter himself as to precisely how this came about and why he did it, it's very difficult to reach a judgment.
Well, I mean, since you know him, Simon, tell me, is he on the Iraqi side?
Well, I wouldn't characterize him as being on the Iraqi side. I think that that's much too simplistic a way of putting it. Peter has reported from Iraq, as you know, for many, many years, for many, many different networks. He's been there for a number of weeks now, putting together a documentary for National Geographic where he's been following various Iraqi families through the lead up to war itself, and he hopes the aftermath. Now, I know from talking to him just 10 days ago in Baghdad before we left that he was obviously very keen to stay. It's difficult times for Western journalists based in Baghdad. The Ministry of Information still has a tight grip over many of those correspondents there, and if you were very keen to stay in Baghdad, you might do things that the Ministry of Information wanted you to do that perhaps with hindsight being 2020 you might have chosen not to do under different circumstances. But again, until we hear from Peter himself, very difficult to know exactly how this all came about.
Let me just ask you this. You were in Baghdad. Were you under pressure to make statements supporting the Baghdad regime or encouraging the people of Iraq to resist the U.S. forces which are bearing down on them?
No, but let me tell you, though, John, that there was a very significant change in climate that we experienced while we were in Baghdad. We were there for around 10 days. We got out 2 weeks ago tonight. For the first 7 days that we were there, the Ministry of Information had a very light touch. I mean, if you saw the reports that we filed to Fox from Baghdad, we were pretty much able to go anywhere we wanted to in the city, interview pretty much anybody we wanted to interview. For me, it was almost a normal assignment. Within the final 72 hours that we were there, we could sense the climate changing. The Ministry of Information officials were getting nervous. Restrictions were being placed on our activities, on our ability to communicate with the outside world. These are not normal circumstances. I'm not trying to justify the things that Peter has said to Iraqi television, but again, until we know why this interview was conducted and the circumstances under which it was conducted, very difficult, I think, to reach conclusions.
Well, it all depends on your perspective. And Simon Marks in Amman, Jordan. Simon, just keep watching for the next few minutes because we're going to put on Peter Arnett's remarks, what he said exactly, and leave to our audience to decide what kind of frame of mind he was in. Simon Marks in Amman, thanks very much. Let us check up on the status of the war. And joining us from Minneapolis is retired U.S. Army Colonel Buzz Creasel. Colonel, we're all focusing on what amounts to the tip of the spear, where U.S. forces are gathering on the doorstep of Baghdad, as it were. What do you see shaping up? Colonel, I'm sorry, we don't have your audio. I thought it was just my earpiece, but it is the audio altogether. Colonel Creasel, just hang on. We'll come back to you in a second. Let me go back to the subject of Peter Arnett. He is one of the few correspondents left Western. Let me proceed with this. Peter Arnett is one of the few Western correspondents left in Baghdad, and he has given an interview to Iraqi TV in which he takes credit for American domestic opposition to the war and even declares the war plan of American generals a failure. Arnett, born in New Zealand, became an American citizen a few years before the Gulf War and has reported for American television since the Vietnam War. He is now working for the National Geographic Explorer. He appeared on Iraqi TV with an Iraqi TV anchor who was wearing military-type dress, and Arnett seemed to cheer the Iraqi resistance.
But clearly this is a city that is disciplined. The population is responsive to the government's requirements of discipline. And my Iraqi friends tell me there's a growing sense of nationalism and resistance to what the United States and Britain is doing.
In addition, Arnett seemed to take credit for his reports, which undermine support for the war back home in America.
It is clear that within the United States there's growing challenge to President Bush about the conduct of the war and also opposition to the war. So our reports about civilian casualties here, about the resistance of the Iraqi forces, are going back to the United States. It helps those who oppose the war and who challenge the policy to develop their arguments.
So his reports helped the opposition. And finally, Arnett declared that the American war plan is a failure.
Now, America is reappraising the battlefield, delaying the war maybe a week, and rewriting the war plan. The first war plan has failed because of Iraqi resistance. Now they're trying to write another war plan.
Arnett appears on American TV on NBC, but he is in Baghdad working for the National Geographic Explorer. NBC released this statement saying, quote, Peter Arnett and his crew have risked their lives to bring the American people up-to-date, straightforward information on what is happening in and around Baghdad. NBC went on to say the impromptu interview with Iraqi TV was done as a professional courtesy, and they wrapped the statement up with, his remarks were analytical in nature and were not intended to be anything more. But appearing on Iraqi TV, there clearly were more. Arnett appears to be aiding the Iraqi government in mobilizing Iraqi resistance and crediting the Iraqi government with defeating the American war plan. Meanwhile, other Western media, including Fox, has been kicked out of Baghdad, and 2 New York newspaper reporters are missing in Baghdad, and management at their newspaper believes they're being held captive by the Iraqi government. Peter Arnett, live in Baghdad, and we may now know why. Before I go back to the Colonel to talk about the state of the war, joining me here in the studio is former United States Senator Alphonse D'Amato. What do you make of that?
Look, this isn't new for Peter Arnett. He has an overinflated view of his own importance. This is a way to get notoriety. He did it back in the Gulf War 10 years ago, 11 years ago. He just repeats it again. He gives aid and comfort to the enemy.
That's a pretty serious charge. I mean,
that's exactly what he does.
Let me be the devil's advocate for just a second. He's sitting there in Baghdad. Other reporters have been jailed or kicked out of the country.
Right.
He wants to stay. Does this sound like he's just trying to butter up the Iraqis?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Is it as bad as you say it is, true aid and comfort to the enemy?
It is absolutely his buttering them up. And in so doing, he goes out and extends aid and comfort. If anything, he is the kind of person who gives false propaganda. First of all, I mean, to say that the United States Army has been defeated or that their plans have gone awry, look, everyone knows that once we could not use a launching facility that we had planned on, that we had hoped from Turkey, that this was going to change our plans. And so therefore, have there been some changes? Of course. And that has been an impact in terms of supplies and in terms of logistics and in terms of bringing a heavy armored division from the north down, which would have diverted troops otherwise committed to defending the South.
He also says that his reports have helped galvanize opposition to the war in this country. I recall that opposition to the war in this country stands pretty low at this point.
And remember this is a man, again, has an overinflated ego in view of his importance. He's taking credit for the opposition. That's total nonsense. The people who have been opposed are opposed. All of us are sorry for the loss of life for innocent civilians.